Yeah, good morning and welcome to the guest lecture sponsored by the San Diego Museum of Art Docent Council. Our museum is located in Balboa Park on the unceded land of the Kumeyaay Nation. My name is David Miles, and I'm the docent chair for this year's guest lecture series. We really appreciate your coming today and joining us. This is just one program in our work as docents to champion the learning and nurture empathy within our diverse communities through exploration and conversation about art, to foster a museum experience that is welcoming and inclusive. And it's your support through the participation and contributions of your time, talent, and treasure that make our community events like this possible. So thank you very much for that. I want to specifically thank a few of my friends before we get too far along, and colleagues, friends and colleagues who've helped make this series possible, including museum staff who broadened our outreach through electronic and social media, specifically Dr. James Grable, the educator, mentor, and guide for all of us docents at our museum, and our docent community of nearly 100 members at the museum. Special thanks today go to Bea Barraza, who you'll hear from in just a moment, and Mary Grillo, who's my partner in crime on this year's season, who will be handling the Q&A later on this morning. But before we go too far, we have a very special announcement about today's lecture and the March lectures going forward for a while. I'd like to turn it over to Bea Barraza, Chair of the Docent Council, to tell us more about that.
Yes.
Bea?
And thank you, and I'd like to extend my welcome to you all, and welcome to the inaugural presentation of the John Welch Memorial Lecture Series, Carrying the Spirits of the People. John's relatively brief tenure as a docent at SDMA from 2011 to 2014 earned him the respect. There he is. Yeah, let me, here we go. There, that's our dear John. That's a lovely picture of him, don't you think? Well, he earned the respect and friendship of those who knew him. His passing on September 22nd last year deeply saddened our docent community. In his 30-year career at UCSD, John was the academic and diversity and equal opportunity officer. His passionate devotion to the causes of diversity and equity had a positive and lasting impact on the university. To commemorate this caring and talented man, his spouse, Dan Stoddard, and his friends, Michael Gretzner and Cesar Rojo, made a significant financial donation to the Docent Council to establish a series of lectures over several years that would address the important issues of diversity and inclusion that were so dear to his heart. We thank them for their generosity and join them in celebrating this truly remarkable and witty man, this gentleman. Thank you so much. And now back to the programming.
Great. Bea, thank you so much for those comments. I'm going to now do one housekeeping item, and that actually is to ask everyone to mute your audio. It's usually found on a computer in the bottom left corner of your screen. Sometimes on a device, it might be in the top right corner, and it will help us keep the sound coming through clearly. And also to let you know that throughout the lecture, you're welcome to enter questions in the chat that my colleague Mary Grillo will then moderate for a Q&A session after our speaker's presentation. Now, let me tell you a little about today's guest speaker. It is really a pleasure to welcome Barbara Mumby-Huerta to speak to us today. Barbara's the Vice President of Programs and Partnerships for the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, headquartered in Portland, Oregon. It's I think an interesting example of an organization that does work in the local community, but has impact on communities throughout the country and throughout the nation. Really great to have her here today. Barbara's an artist herself, and I have to say, you may have seen her interview in the San Diego Union Tribune this past weekend. In that interview, I'm going to just do a quick lift from that to explain how she's going to be talking about how artists are at the forefront, pushing the envelope on issues to raise awareness about things going on in the world, and in communities, usually before the rest of us really have a time to think and process that. That whole movements begin with artists, and because they are such visionaries and have the courage to put themselves out in front largely before most of us do. Lately, in conversation with friends, I've wondered about what artists are, how they're responding already to, for instance, the war in Ukraine. You know that they are, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that work comes out. So this morning, we have the privilege of hearing Barbara speak on the topic is carrying the spirits of the people, Native artists leading the way towards social justice. Barbara?
Thank you, David and Beatrice and Mary and everyone who's brought me into this space today. It's an honor to be here with you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. And share my PowerPoint. So there we go. All righty. So as we face uncertainty in the world around us today, we often look to our Native artistic voices and creative minds to lead, inspire, and ground us. Like constellations, they're our guiding lights. They foster our deep and sacred connections to the earth, and they remind us of our humanity, the power of our dreams, and the beauty of humor. So their contributions, ideas, and solutions around the pressing issues affecting the lives of many Native peoples in their homelands and as global citizens are vital to our future. So lifting up our contemporary artistic voices after generations of attempted erasure and reclaiming our languages, our cultures, and histories are actually necessary acts of Indigenous resilience and liberation. So in this quote on the screen by Joy Harjo, she shares that in order for our country to come together on a spiritual and creative level, we must nourish the roots. And these roots are the arts, cultures, language, and humanities of our Native peoples. Without the acknowledgement and inclusion of Indigenous roots, a land or a country is untethered and lacks stability. So today I'm going to share a little bit about our organization, the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, as well as take you on a little journey through the nation and share a selection of Native artists who are working in various disciplines and sharing excerpts of their work, as well as a few videos so you can hear directly from the artists. You'll see common threads that weave throughout their individual artistic practices and to one another. These threads speak to their connections to place. They lend voice to stories, both ancient and contemporary, and they push the boundaries of what mainstream society considers Native art to be. So we came about in the early 2000s. The Ford Foundation published a study that explored the creation of a new philanthropic resource to support the diverse arts and cultures of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities. The study revealed that developing a Native-led or Native partnering organization to direct critically needed support to Native American artists and communities was not only achievable, but essential. So as a result, the Ford Foundation provided the seed money and a small endowment to create our organization. We're a national 501c3 philanthropic organization dedicated exclusively to the revitalization, appreciation, and perpetuation of Indigenous arts and cultures. So a majority Native board and staff work to support artists that belong to federally or state enrolled American Indian tribes, Alaska Native corporations, and Native Hawaiian communities. So we do this through monetary grants, convenings, advocacy, and exhibiting and presenting their work. So currently we're embarking upon a $25 million capital campaign. And that's in relation to the Center for Native Arts and Cultures. So in a very exciting turn of events, we were gifted a building last year, and that can be considered an unprecedented act of what we call rematriation. So the historic building has now become the new headquarters for the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, and we've renamed it the Center for Native Arts and Cultures, as you can see in the image on the screen. We're located in Southeast Portland, excuse me, and the building is nearly 40,000 square feet and occupies a half city block. It's also listed on the National Historic Registry of Historic Places, and our agreement with the nonprofit that gifted it to us, there is a covenant in the title that requires that it remain a space for arts. And through that capital campaign that we're embarking upon, we're looking to create, not only make the building seismically sound, but we want to create a true art space. So there'll be a black box theater, gallery spaces, and maker spaces for artists. And of particular note, a very interesting aspect is that the building itself is situated over a tributary of the Willamette River. And this was a historical meeting place for the many tribes of the area to fish and trade and gather with one another. So rather than cementing over the tributary, the renovation will actually open up the river and create a reflective space within the building so that the community can come together, reflect, and conduct ceremony at the water's edge. So the addition of the building has pivoted our organization from an itinerant grant-making organization to the only national Native-owned and led art center and presenter on the West Coast. It's also expanded our scope of work. So now we can support artists throughout the full trajectory of their career, from monetary supports for emerging artists and all the way through exhibiting and presenting the works of more established artists. And locally, the center is a place to support and represent the diverse Native community in the Portland metro area. So over the past decade, we've provided over $13 million in monetary support to more than 338 Native artists and organizations throughout the nation. This support was provided through the variety of programs you see on the screen. So our national and regional fellowships included unrestricted awards that range from $10,000 to $20,000 to allow for time and space to study, reflect, and experiment. The mentorship program offered $30,000 to a mentor artist to work with an apprentice. And the purpose of that was to perpetuate traditional arts, build upon a visual arts practice, and provide an avenue for a new generation of artists. We've also offered support for large-scale, multi-year, artist-driven and design projects that connect Native and non-Native people in community conversations that address the urgency of social, cultural, and environmental concerns to create positive change through what is called the Community Inspiration Program. And most recently, we awarded small pandemic responsive awards to artists that were impacted by COVID-19. And in 2019, we embarked upon a pretty intensive strategic planning process. And through our outreach and engagement, we discovered that our stakeholders were most concerned about issues around the environment, cultural preservation and revitalization, and around the perceptions of Native peoples. So as a result, we reimagined our grant making and developed two new signature programs. The first program we call Shift, and it provides funding to an established artist and a partnering organization to exercise the power of creative practice to address positive social change. Positive cultural social change, cultural revitalization, and community resilience. These 100,000 awards allow the artist and their partner to consider more expansive projects that benefit Native communities while driving critical conversations on national and global issues. So our first cohort of 15 pairs are now moving into the second half of their 2-year grants, and we anticipate releasing a call for a new cohort in the beginning of 2013. The second program is called Lift, and this focuses on expanding the potential of emerging artists and supports the development of fresh voices to envision the future of our respective Native practices. And our first cohort is moving towards the completion of their 1-year grant, and applications for the call for the second cohort just closed this week. We don't just provide monetary support to our artists. Each award comes with access to a variety of supports that are listed here. And that includes professional development opportunities that we customize to each group of grantees. And we also provide the support of professional evaluators to work with each awardee so that they can tell their own unique story. And I think the most challenging aspect of this presentation was curating a list of artists to share because there's so many to choose from. There are common themes that emerge within the work of Indigenous artists, one of maintaining our traditions of storytelling, nurturing our intertwined relationships to the land and to place, and the upholding of our values of reciprocity and respect. In the next part of this presentation, I will highlight a small selection of our artists and artists that come from long lines of ancestral dreamers and who carry our ways of knowing within their DNA. They breathe life into dreams, into our ways of knowing, and help us remember our traditions while moving us forward as people. So beginning with a Pulitzer Prize winning literary artist, Natalie Diaz was born in Fort Mojave Indian Village in Needles, California, and she's an enrolled member of the Gia River Indian community. She earned a BA from Old Dominion University, and she was also received a full athletic scholarship, and she played professional basketball in Europe and Asia before returning to Old Dominion to earn an MFA. She's the author of the poetry collections Post-Colonial Love Poems, winner of which won her the Pulitzer Prize, and also When My Brother Was an Aztec. Her other honors and awards include the Nimrod Hardman Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry and the Narrative Poetry Prize and a Lannan Literary Fellow. She currently lives in the Mojave Valley in Arizona and works with the last speakers of the Mojave language and directs our language revitalization program. So rather than me telling you about Natalie, we can hear from her directly.
As much as we know of reservations as being troubled places, they are also places where there's an incredible kind of culture and communal love that happens. And I think the way I see everything, the way I see all of my art was formed there on the reservation, listening to my great-grandmother's stories, hearing the language, talking with my elders. I'm Natalie Diaz, and I'm a poet and linguist. Poetry is strange, and my arrival to it was, I think, a little bit unorthodox. I was always an athlete, and so for me, poetry is one way I center myself in my body, and the way that happens is that I really believe in the physical power of poetry, of language. Where we come from, we say language has an energy, and I feel that it's a very physical energy, and so I believe in that exchange. And to me, it's very similar to what I did on a basketball court. I began as a linguist before I became a poet. So that is a really important part of my poetry, is putting pressure on language and, deciding what words, what phrases, make certain people's invisible and certain people's visible. When My Brother Was an Aztec is still a collection that I feel in my body when I read it. There is a brother who figures heavily into the work, but I had to do a lot of imagining to try to create a brother in the poem who had the capacity to hold my emotions the way they are in my everyday. And so that's one thread of the collection, is how do you love and even sometimes unlove a family member who is an addict? And more, how does that affect the ways the family loves one another? The last Mojave Indian Barbie was an interesting poem because I feel like it's the one where I embraced the stereotypes the most. Like I really wanted to put my hands on them, and I wanted to be able to retell a story, breaking those stereotypes. I was also able to give a female some autonomy in that poem. The work I've done with my elders to help preserve the Mojave language is one of the most important things I've done in my life. And in some ways, I don't think I will ever write anything more important than the stories of theirs that I have written down. I am an Indigenous woman, a queer woman, a Latinx woman. What I hope my work can offer a queer writer or a queer identifying person in general is the space to, one, hold the ways we've been hurt and the ways we've been erased, and also to hold, in the other hand, simultaneously, the way we deserve love, our capacities for love, and all of the innovative ways we've managed to find to express that love to one another.
I'm always amazed by how our poets can articulate common themes and information.
As
such
much as we know of reservations as being troubled places.
There we go. I think I got it this time. You know, the exchange of energy and how important that is. And we have many other writers that do that as well. One to highlight is Michael Wasson, who is Nez Perce from Northern Idaho. And he sees poetry as his calling to create space for Indigenous artists, not merely in the Western canon, but as a counterweight to its violence and legacy. His works, The Exile and Prenatal, weaves fluently between English and his native tongue, creating images and stories which unearth Indigenous imagery within the framework of contemporary literature and poetics. He writes that there are questions in my work more often than answers. Questions such as, what nation's this body? How does an Indigenous person survive? What American narrative intuits a self when its histories and mythologies are braided and consequently brutalized under the legacy of colonialism? Where is it that one's skin can be brought back from extinction? So he earned his Bachelor's of Arts in English from Lewis and Clark College and his Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing with a poetry emphasis from Oregon State University. So pivoting now to visual artists, Chinupa Hanska Luger graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2011 with his BFA and found his artistic voice rather quickly. So since his graduation, he has had countless solo and group exhibitions throughout the Southwest region. He promises to be one of those artists whose caliber is unmatched and whose work will be studied by students to come, furthering the path for many more contemporary Native artists. He's a contemporary multimedia sculptural artist who constantly experiments with mediums to develop cutting edge aesthetics and explore ways to deconstruct world perceptions about Native identity. He uses his artwork as a catalyst to challenge and hopefully change colonial social structures, expectations, interpretations, and perceptions of Native art. Ultimately, he hopes his multidisciplinary work conveys the provocative stories of the complexity and diversity of Indigenous identities through his socially conscious sculptural work. And here are some examples. In 2016, thousands of people descended upon Standing Rock Reservation to protect the water against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which had been rerouted downriver from the reservation. So in addition to threatening the water, this new path of the pipeline desecrated several ancestral burial sites of both the Mandan and Lakota peoples. So Chinupa, whose father was from Standing Rock Reservation, felt he needed to raise awareness about this issue. So as an artist, he knew he had access and privilege to a much larger global community to affect change and generate the support his homelands needed. By using art as a measure of action and creating an open source format call for participation with an instructional video, he launched the Mirror Shield project, which you can see in the photo on the left. It inspired people from across the nation to create and transport what has been estimated to be over 1,000 mirrored shields to the Oceti-Sakowin camp near Standing Rock. Oops, sorry, I'm too fast. Once on site, these shields were available for use by the water protectors and frontline actions, and they stood up against the police and the pipeline. So the mirror shields were also the inspiration for a collaborative performance piece entitled The Water Serpent Action, where hundreds of water protectors were invited to engage in a site-specific performance piece where they walked the entire Oceti-Sakowin camp while holding the mirrors overhead, creating a moving river or serpent-like formation. And this was documented from above by a drone. This action was intended for the police surveillance planes that were constantly flying overhead so that they could witness the water protectors' resilience and how their own toxic practices of surveillance upon those at the Oceti-Sakowin camp reflected back at them. In the second photo on the right, this is Chinupa's work entitled Murdered Missing Indigenous Women Queer and Trans Bead Project. An instructional video was shared on social media by the artist as a call for collaboration with communities from across the US and Canada. And they were to create and send 2-inch clay beads that represented the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous community members. The clay objects were then fired, stained in ink, and strung together by Chinupa to create the monumental ceramic sculptural installation entitled Everyone. This work rehumanizes large and abstract data through the process of creating handmade objects that represent each life in the over 4,000 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. This project also brings awareness to the fact that Indigenous LGBTQ plus community members are not often included in data collection around this issue, yet these communities are impacted at comparable alarming rates to that of women. So now I'm going to share Chinupa speaking about his art.
Chinupa Hanska shares his inspiration.
So much of this clay building is by feel and less by what I'm actually seeing. So I used to zone out, and I'd be working on a piece using my hands, but staring off into the studio, the other students working, and not really paying attention to what my eyes were falling on. And many a time got the, what are you looking at? What are you looking at?
What inspires you to work as an artist?
Communication, desire to talk. And that the ideas are open-ended, which is what's important to me. That the communication that I desire isn't textbook truths, it's honesty and it's sincerity. I find truth to be really rigid and fragile, whereas honesty and sincerity has a level of pliability, plasticity. It's flexible. What humans bring to the table, they tend to project, you know, and I totally do it myself, you know what I'm saying? And I like that. I like that idea. It reminds me of storytelling, you know, of more of an oral tradition than a written history. Oral traditions can have amazing, fantastic themes and ideas and characters in them, you know. Something that you don't quite understand can become a fiery beast, you know, or a darkness can become some hidden monster, you know, and it's all real, you know. It may not be true, but it's all real.
Right.
And I find art making it comes from that same desire to communicate a complex idea, reduce it down to its like purest form, and then let that go and be a part of the world and allow the viewer to retell that story.
Again, that theme of storytelling comes up over and over again within the works of these artists. I did it again, sorry. And so now Rose Simpson is another storyteller. She is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara Pueblo, and her work broadly encompasses ceramic and metal sculpture, fashion, performance, music, custom cars, and installation. Her work is powerful, earthy, and reveals a strongly independent voice. So she says that her connection to New Mexico is bigger than a choice. It's the center of my world, the center of the earth, and where I find my inspiration. And she descends from a long line of potters and artists whose work have defined new standards of native pottery. And she received her MFA in ceramics from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts. And she's collected in museums across the continent and has exhibited internationally. So in this excerpt of her work, comes from the spring of 2013. She was invited to be an artist in residence at the Denver Art Museum. And during this time, she crafted post-apocalyptic Indigenous warrior regalia out of leather, metal, found objects, and ceramic components. She was simultaneously enrolled at the Northern New Mexico College of Automotive Science program, and she was working toward a certificate in auto body. The result was Maria, a 1985 El Camino painted in the black on black style of famed potter Maria Martinez from San Ildefonso Pueblo. Maria debuted at the Denver Art Museum, where Rose drove the car up the street and to the entrance of the museum, flanked by a squad of post-apocalyptic Indigenous warriors, people of Indigenous and queer identities. During the procession, a heartbeat was bumped through a 1,000-watt speaker system that emanated from the cab of the El Camino. The intention of this performance series was to challenge the stereotyping of Indigenous identities and deconstruct gender roles, transform the relationship of objectification of women in car culture, and consider the reapplication of relational aesthetics. So now our journey is going to take us over to Kauai in Hawaii, and cultural bearer Sabra Kauka is celebrated as one of the most influential women leaders of Kauai. She shares her passion for Hawaiian culture by educating youth and adults alike. Her knowledge and care for the environment and perpetuation of Native Hawaiian traditions have made her a respected cultural leader of the community. She serves as Kumu of Hawaiian Studies and Hula at the Island School, and as the coordinator of Hawaiian Studies on Kauai for the Department of Education. Sabra is a founding member and past president of grassroots nonprofit Nepali Coast Ohana, and it's dedicated to preserving natural and cultural resources of the Nepali Coast State Park. Her work at the ancient Hawaiian village of Nualolo Kai is considered one of the most successful curator programs in Hawaii. She still serves on the Garden Island Resource Conservation and Development Board to restore cultural sites for future generations. So in this short video, we'll learn a little bit more about Sabra and her work around the kapa cloth and preserving that tradition. How she says it's a process of relearning, and another Hawaiian artist that does that as well is our next slide. And that's Keli'i Okalani Makua. And he follows the traditional way of Hawaiian tattooing and apprenticed under Hawaiian tattoo master Keone Nunez for nearly 3 decades. And he was titled Hawaiian tattoo specialist or kind of a priest in 2016, following into the tradition of his own 6th great grandfather. Through the years, he has contributed actively alongside Keone Nunez to bring the tradition of tattooing back to the people of Hawaii. So Makua has come to understand and activate rituals and ceremonies that connect the spiritual to the physical and separates the sacred from the mundane. So the core purpose of Makua's work today is to strengthen those he works on by connecting them to their ancestral lineage, their lands, and the works of old through a technique called kilo, or skilled observation. So he will sit with and speak with a person, sometimes for hours or days, to learn of their family and heritage, their trials and successes, and their hopes and dreams. The result is the placement of the most appropriate traditional markings on the body of those who seek to be tattooed by him, a design that reflects the recipient's past, present, and future. So after prayers are offered, a moli, which is a tool made of wood and bone on the right-hand photo, it looks like a miniature rake, and it's dipped into ink made of kukui ash, and another stick is used to tap the teeth into the skin. In the end, as they say, the skin that was once silent now will speak with meaning. And moving over to the Arctic Circle, we have Stephen Kachung Blanchette. And for him, one of the main impetuses for bringing him into the world of performance art was his own mixed cultural heritage. He's the son of a strong Yupik Inuit mother who brought him up in an extremely traditional lifestyle, and a strong African-American father who taught him to be proud of his Black heritage. That all shaped his upbringing. As he has done many times artistically, he first had to blend and mix, I went too fast and jumped ahead. There we go. He is a global citizen whose Yupik and Black roots guide his leadership and artistic vision. And he served in leadership roles with the Alaska Native Heritage Center, the First Alaskans Institute, his own performance group, Pamua Inc., and other arts and cultural and community service entities. He graduated from the University of Alaska Anchorage with the Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Alaska Native Studies. And most recently, he was named a 2022 United States Artist Fellow, as well as one of Kennedy Center's 50 honorees. And in the video, in this video, this was created during the pandemic, and it's called Blessing in a Time of Crisis. And as you can see, it's how artists are able to creatively create even in times when we're separated from one another.
Akuli.
That video always makes my heart warm. It makes me smile. Not that I'll make you watch it again, but I will move forward here. In a similar vein, we have Frank Wallen, who's Lakota, and he's an actually Indigenous American rapper. And he's a songwriter and activist from the Rosebud Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. So he travels the world telling his story through performance and workshops focusing on self-empowerment and the expression of truth. Rap, the art form, is driven by communal narratives and civic engagement. So that resonated powerfully with Frank and echoed the storytelling traditions of his own Indigenous community. Today, he is an award-winning musician and a passionate advocate for Indigenous resilience, decolonization, and youth empowerment. His accolades include 3 Native American Music Awards, a 2014 Native American 40 Under 40 Award, a 2014 Chicago Mayor's Award for Civic Engagement, as well as a 3 Arts Grant for Chicago Arts. And another young person of note is Shondine Lawrence, and she's actually a champion hoop dancer and instructor. So growing up immersed in Native American arts and traditions, her family's dance troupe traveled around America, showcasing hoop dance and performing at powwows and festivals. That experience opened doors for them to travel extensively and build relationships across nations and cultures. So growing up in Arizona with her artistic family, she was taught how to hoop dance when she was 8 years old by her oldest brother, Nakota. And he was a multiple world champion hoop dancer, and he passed away tragically in 2020. So at the age of 18, Shondine followed in her brother's footsteps and ran away from home to join Cirque du Soleil's big top show Totem, and where she traveled the world for about 8 years and performs 300 times every year. So when she's not under the big top, she returns to her home on the Tewa Reservation of New Mexico, and she teaches hoop dance to the Indigenous youth. She's also pursuing careers in film, television, and modeling. So in this video, you can see how a traditional art form has been moved into more of a contemporary presentation. Oops. I sped up too far again, and that music will get you moving for sure. And another artist in Hawaii who also merges tradition with contemporary is Patrick Makuakani. He was actually born and raised in Honolulu, and he's a creative force in the hula world and is well known for his innovative choreography. Although his work is grounded in traditions and the fundamentals of hula, and he works really hard to keep traditional dances intact, he's also developed a unique style of hula called hula mua. And that uses modern music to provide a whole new dimension to the poetry of hula. So hula mua illuminates the hidden complexity of traditional hula moves and it choreographs it to exciting dance narratives for modern music. He's received numerous awards for his choreography, including several Isadora Duncan Awards and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival, as well as an Artistic Legacy Award from the San Francisco Arts Commission. Now heading over to folks working in theater, Larissa Fasthorse grew up in South Dakota, where she began her career as a ballet dancer and another choreographer. Returning to an early interest in writing, she became involved in Native American drama, first in the Native film community, but she found her artistic home as a playwright. Her satirical comedy, The Thanksgiving Play, was one of the top 10 most produced plays in America. She is the first Native American playwright in the history of American theater on that list. She's also co-founded Indigenous Direction, which is a consulting firm that helps organizations and individuals who want to create accurate work by, for, and with Indigenous peoples. She's a 2020 MacArthur Fellow, and she's produced plays such as What Would Crazy Horse Do?, Landless, and Cow Pie Bingo, and Teaching Disco Square Dancing to Our Elders. And she has developed plays with theaters such as Yale Repertory Theater, the Guthrie, Geffen Playhouse, and the Kennedy Center Theater for Young Audiences. Recently, she's returned to working in film and TV with projects with NBC, Disney Channel, DreamWorks, and Apple. And this video, she talks about her work as it stems from the MacArthur Genius Award.
To me, theater is life. Theater is happening, it's storytelling, it's powwow dancing, it's going to feast days at a pueblo in New Mexico with these beautiful choreographed dances. Theater is everywhere and everything, and all human beings participate in theater. My name is Larissa Fasthorse, and I am a playwright. From the beginning of my career, it's been important for my very first play to find ways to include Indigenous peoples and populations into my work by creating works that not only tell Indigenous stories and use Indigenous ways of thinking, but they also include Indigenous peoples and provide greater access to them to have agency over the way that they're portrayed. Urban Res was a play I created with Cornerstone Theater Company and my collaborator, Michael John Garces. And we created this large immersive outdoor experience that talks about what does it mean to be declared extinct by the government? How do you get tribal recognition back? What does it mean to be located outside of your culture and your place? For the folks that attend it, yes, there's a story to it. But what was important to us is we created this visceral experience of coming into land in Los Angeles that you feel like you know, and you feel like you understand. And when people attended Urban Res, they felt comfortable and like, this is land I feel good on. And then as the experience of the play happens and you hear all these stories happening around you and you have to make choices and you can't have everything you want and there's too many things happening at once, you start to feel uncomfortable on that land. And you start to feel like you don't know where your feet should go. And by the end of the play, you realize that that feeling is how Native people who've been declared extinct by the government feel every day on their own land. And hopefully when you leave Urban Res, you look at that land differently. I wrote the Thanksgiving play in response to many theater companies telling me that they could not do second or third productions of my work because of casting. I was told again and again that even one half Native American character made a play uncastable. I know that audiences want to hear Indigenous stories. They want to learn about these things. And if you're not going to cast my plays, then I'm going to create a play that deals with all the contemporary Indigenous issues that I face every day in my career. But I'm going to give it to you with 4 white presenting people, trying to devise a play that's culturally sensitive, that celebrates both Thanksgiving and Native American Heritage Month. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of challenges and pitfalls in trying to fulfill all of those desires. For me, a lot of what I love about theater is what I love about Lakota community. Lakota community is built on this interconnected web of people that each have a purpose and a reason and a way to support each other. And theater is the same way. I see the playwright as just one small part of this huge collaborative machine that gets to create this magic that audiences partake in when we come to the theater. And it's such a gift to be in this world, and I'm grateful for it every day.
Again, that story, the storytelling theme continues.
To me, theater is life.
And that is also applicable to our next artist. Once I get there. So Allison Kutchuk-Warden, she bridges the genre of dance, theater, and traditional and rap music. So she's a multi-interdisciplinary artist. She engages her audience with stories and themes of the Yunipiaq people and pays homage to tradition while bringing a fresh perspective to contemporary issues through various mediums. She uses irreverence to engage her audiences and the power of hip hop to broach unorthodox themes and appreciation for its oral resonance with traditional Inupiaq sounds and drum beats. Every aspect of her performance, from her lyrics to her regalia and integration of Yunipiaq dance, honors her ancestors and asserts the continuity of her tribal sovereignty over their land. And in our final category of film, we have Anna Hoover, who earned her master's degree in Native American art history and Indigenous documentary filmmaking. Her work has long been connected to the environment, and she is very involved in the community. When she's not creating, she works as a private pilot and a salmon fisher. She's received support for her career from Alaska Humanities Forum, the Institute of American Indian Arts, and the Rasmussen Foundation. She's also written 4 episodes for Molly of Denali, an award-winning children's animation show that airs on PBS in the US and Canada. And one of her recent documentary films profiles Kanatuck, a historical Alaska town located on the Alaskan Peninsula with roots in the fur and oil boom eras, with the last generation of residents sharing childhood memories of growing up there. So the next video is a short trailer for her film called The Last Walk.
Maybe one day I can truly heal.
Let's show your mom we could double her catch today. Boy.
But first, I must forgive myself for turning my back on you.
Jesse, you've got to get some help.
We had a lot of blessings here, but we started forgetting who we were. I just wanted you to forgive me.
Maybe one day I can truly heal. I've heard the birds.
So similar to Anna, Billy Luther also brings mindful and personal depictions of the complexity of their tribal or reservation home life to the screen. He's inspired by his Navajo, Hopi, and Laguna Pueblo heritage. His notable first film was titled Miss Navajo, and it's a journey through an annual pageant, which his mother actually won in 1966. He shows how today's pageant contestants demonstrate mastery of cultural practices that are necessary to win the award. And that includes something like fluency in their language and knowing how to skin and butcher a sheep single-handedly. His moving debut premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was broadcast nationally on PBS's Independent Lens and was honored with a Michael Moore Special Founders Prize. He studied film at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, and the Sundance Institute invited him to participate in its native film program in 2007. And in 2020, he graduated from the Sundance Institute's Directors and Screenwriters Labs. And I know that was a quick overview of many artists, and we have many more artists we could have shared. But all of the artists I've shared with you today are storytellers, whether they use the written word or a visual representation to share the stories and lives of their people and their ancestors. So I hope each one of you has been inspired, and I hope this has also expanded your understanding of and appreciation for the works created by Native artists. So thank you very much for indulging me.
Thank you, Barbara. Wow, this is wonderful. Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you for the Q&A.
Okay. So what's wonderful about this presentation that often we don't have the opportunity to see the total scope of the different arts and the influence it has on moving society, really. And I was wondering, how does the center, one, solicit, but two, choose all these different artists? Are you always looking for a theme? Because these artists varied a lot in terms of connecting contemporary to traditional, or just focusing on the traditional. And I was wondering how you choose and solicit.
Luckily, we don't actually choose. Thank goodness.
Okay.
So we do solicit through our grant making programs. You know, the kind of criteria has shifted over the years. Our current programs of the Lift and Shift look more at artists who are reaching through their art to address a social issue like environment or identity. We do work with a panel of peers, so other artists in the field that are doing the work that could adjudicate these incredible artists and try to support the ones that come to the top. That's hard to say. Currently in our we are a small grant maker, so each cycle with our lift, which are emerging artists, we only can fund 20 artists. We just received 175 applications for those 20 spots, so it's very competitive in our organization. But we also work and partner with other Native organizations who are doing similar work and see how we can support artists outside of kind of our grant making. And that's the beauty of having the building now. We're able to expand and support artists more deeply and broadly because of that space. So where we were kind of limited through resources, the variety of resources we have at our disposal have expanded. So it'll be great to see in the next couple of years how that impacts the field.
So in your recent solicitations or choices, has the theme of climate change predominated or influenced the applicants?
It seems to always be an underlying theme, whether it's overt in some of our artists who are, very clearly working to raise awareness, to artists that maybe are more like cultural bearers. So like Sabra's work around the kappa cloth or basket weavers, environment impacts their practice because materials may be oversourced or growing extinct, or they may not have access to the resources any longer because of private land ownership, that type of thing. So it is something that's woven through all of the work in some way or another, along with identity and perceptions of Native people, really still working to raise awareness that Native people are still here and vital and living and creating and breathing and all of those things.
So could you address the difficulty of bringing this work to the larger community?
Yeah, again, we work with our partners who do great work as well to highlight the artists. We oftentimes will have conferences that we work to bring artists into those spaces where many organizations will reach out to us looking for Native artists to perform or exhibit at different events that are taking place. So in that way, we kind of function as an unofficial booking agent in that way. And I think over the past couple of years, that demand has grown as awareness has shifted during the pandemic and kind of the social crisis that we've been experiencing. We've seen a more interest in being more diverse in what they're representing and making sure to acknowledge and include First Peoples in that work. But resources are always a challenge. And again, with the center, we're hoping that at least on the West Coast, we'll be able to really bring these not only local artists, but the national artists that we work with into a space that people can really witness their work.
Okay. Here's a question from our audience. If people are the reflection of culture, and if culture is the reflection of the land, then what becomes of the reflections when the land is no more?
That's deep.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy for her.
You're making me think this morning. I think the connection to land is rooted so deeply in us, whether you're a Native person from this continent or you're an immigrant from another continent. I think just some of us are more aware or attuned to those rooted connections. And even within my own tribal history, my people come from the East Coast, from the Powhatan Confederacy. So we're from the Chesapeake Bay area, and we don't have a land base any longer. So how do we maintain connections to place that we no longer have access to in the same way as a community that has maybe a reservation or a land base? And that's challenging. I think a lot of times you feel untethered. And I think that's the same for some of our immigrant communities who have been displaced. You don't, that connection, trying to regain or reestablish connection and finding that within people and other parts of your culture, like language and art. So that's, I think that land connection is always within us, even if we no longer have access to it.
Could you give us the name of the interactive play that was discussed? I think it was something Res, the one.
Yeah, it's Larissa Fast Horse. And it was, I think, Urban Res. That may have been, let me see if I can locate it. I believe that's what it was. Urban Res by Larissa Fast Horse.
And then also, what was the collection from Natalie Diaz that won the Pulitzer? It wasn't the last Mojave Indian.
No, it was the, I will find it. It's in my notes.
Sorry, I couldn't.
I will find it. Post-colonial love poem.
Oh, thank you. So one of the themes you talked about was storytelling and the reciprocity and respect, the values of reciprocity and respect. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Well, reciprocity, even in where we're sitting, we're giving and receiving information from one another and doing that in a way that I feel is very respectful. And I think that's the same for Native communities, being cognizant of where you're at and the need to walk in a space, very aware of the original people of that place, the stewards of that place, if you're a guest in that space or not, and how you give of yourself. It's not necessarily a monetary or a physical gift, but giving of your time and your space, your energy, listening, being open, and understanding, leading with empathy. I think those are all values of reciprocity that is so important to Native people. And through that, we respect one another in that way. That's hard to do on a everyday basis, in this world. We're always challenged with things around us to walk in those ways, but always trying to stay grounded and come back to those values.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I was fascinated by, is it Chinuba Hansk Luger?
Yes.
He talked about honesty and sincerity versus truth, which can be rigid. And I found that a fascinating concept because, we've had discussions about who tells the history or the truth creates one story, right?
Right.
But I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the oral tradition. And I assume my experience is it can change as it goes along, and that's okay. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah. Perception and truth kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
My perception of the truth may be different than yours, just based upon my own individual cultural lens. And the people that tell our history are generally the people who are in power. And so I think that's kind of what he was alluding to. And truth for each of us is rigid. What we believe to be true is true to us. But I think what he was referring to with sincerity is that if we lead with empathy and lead with trying to understand, then that's the sincerity part that will help shape truth in that way. He's a very, very deep thinking, incredible person to listen to. And that video goes on. I would suggest anyone to continue to listen to that because he has lots of different things to say about everything. But yeah, and I think artists that's part of their role, is to really push our understanding and perceptions and what that means in relation to truth. And as more Indigenous artists claim their voice, I think it challenges the truth that mainstream society has embraced for so long. And that's hard. That's hard to be faced with something that you've thought to be true is being challenged. And now you're thinking, well, maybe that wasn't the truth. So that's the rigidity that we need to, that artists help to kind of push and shape and mold and flex.
Mm-hmm. And I think we see that in other cultures as well, but I thought it was articulated so clearly in this example. I was blown away by his artwork. I mean, the whole idea of the mirror shields as an activist approach to art, I mean, it was quite brilliant. I mean, it was really incredible. I really loved it. And then living in San Diego, we see tattoos all over the place. But I'm across the street from a tattoo parlor. But so I was fascinating the tradition of tattoo as giving your skin meaning or having it speak of meaning of your past or of yourself was totally new to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tradition? Is it specific to Hawaii, or do we see it?
I think we're seeing a resurgence of tattooing through multiple Indigenous communities. And of course, they're the folks that will tattoo anything on their body,
Yeah.
And then there's those that will seek guidance and input from their elders and do it in a way that's more traditional. We see that happening in California. There's a resurgence of facial tattoos that are happening amongst California Indian women, as well as the Inuit or women in the Arctic Circle. I think that is a shift, and it's a form of empowerment. You have a Lakota and Alaskan Native supermodel now who is walking runways with a chin tattoo. That's pretty popular.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we see more of that happening, but just like any element of culture or an exotified culture, people will commodify and co-opt. So then you do see non-Indigenous people wearing kind of what is termed the tribal tattoos. But as you can tell with Makua's work, I mean, that's a process. That's days long process that involves ceremony and prayer, and it's painful. Yeah. And so, that you need a skilled person that could kind of take you on that journey, as opposed to having a tattoo parlor do that for you.
Mm-hmm. And then just to wrap up, I guess, although here is a wonderful comment. I hesitate to read it because I'm sure I'm going to pronounce everything wrong, but this is from Ani Barbara. Ani, are you there?
That's hello. She's saying
hello.
Yeah, it's from Kathy.
Oh, okay. And so I'm glad you can see that, and everyone who's on can look at the chat to see it. It's a wonderful tribute to your presentation, and speaks of her work. So I just want to.
People in Canada are doing incredible things.
Yeah.
So excited. I definitely want to come to your conference. And James Luna, who I knew, always encouraged me to pay attention to your organization. And over the years, I've just kind of forgotten. So this is a fantastic reminder. And I feel like we're like cousins or something because of the similar work.
Yes, I'll reach out to you, Kathy. I would love to talk more about you and your work and get you over to our conference. That'd be wonderful. It's a shame that we have borders that limit our work, but we're working on ways to cross those borders with one another. So
like our ancestors did.
Yeah.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Oh, please do.
All right. Well, and I also want to thank you for playing the video, the blessing song, because it just it did make, I think, all of us smile, and it was so heartwarming, and I could watch it over and over again. So, and I plan to. So thank you so much for that. This was so wonderful, and just sharing this wealth of different aspects of the arts really was special for us. So I want to thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my honor and pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Mary, this afternoon. This has been really, really inspiring, and it reminds me why how proud I am that our museum is beginning to include Indigenous artwork from Indigenous peoples, just to keep that in people's minds and perspectives. It's every time I see this, I gain a little bit more appreciation and understanding. So thank you very much for being here today. Before we close, I'd like to quickly tell you about two things that are coming up. On Tuesday, May 3rd, we have a conversation with installation artists, Fernando Casasempere, John Morales, and Anya Galacio. This is going to be led by Anita Feldman. It will coincide with the opening of Fernando Casasempere's installed exhibition at the museum. So this should be a really interesting conversation. And then on our next guest lecture, formal guest lecture, will be Friday, May 20th by Lisa Farrington. And the topic of her conversation that day is going to be the world before racism. And it should be a very provocative and enlightening conversation with Lisa Farrington, who's an academic. Dr. Farrington is a really well-respected academic who will bring new insights to this whole idea. So just as a reminder, that's May 3rd, a Tuesday, for a conversation with installation artists, and Lisa Farrington on May 20th. So with that, I will say thank you to all of you. Thank you, Barbara, again, and we'll see you next time. Take care.